Let's now talk about a price taker's market. Now, in a price taker's market, we make a couple major assumptions. The first is profit maximization. We assume that profit maximization is really the goal for any firm or any business. The idea here is that firms are trying to maximize their economic profits. That is, they're trying to do as well as they possibly can financially. Now, this would naturally then imply that for any given level of production, they're trying to keep their costs low. So we're actually going to assume as economists that businesses are already doing a reasonably good job controlling their costs. So if they're producing, say, 100 t-shirts a day, they're doing so in the most cost-efficient manner. The question, though, that we're going to ask is, should they produce 100 t-shirts a day, or should they perhaps produce 50 or 150? We're really going to focus in on this quantity of production kind of question, rather than focus on are they doing a good job minimizing their costs or not. Another assumption in the price taker's market in particular is that there is no individual control over price. That is, as an individual seller of the product, I don't have any control over what the price of my product is. Now, there are very few markets where this is literally true. It might be the case, say, if you're selling on a large, well-established exchange. So, for example, when I sell a share of AT&T stock on the stock market, even though technically I'm not a producer for that, but if I haven't and I'm trying to sell it, the market is so well established that I really don't have any control over the price. I just sell it whatever the market price happens to be on the market as it has been established. The same can go sometimes for things like agricultural products, have very well-established exchanges, things like wheat and the like. You might just be stuck with whatever the price of wheat happens to be. Now, at the same time, there are lots of markets where this is not literally true, but where it's very close to true. For that to be the case, it tends to be that you have lots of sellers selling virtually identical products as far as the consumer is concerned. So, that being the case, you have to take whatever the going market price is as given. Right? Charging more will price you out of the market. After all, if everybody else is selling exactly the same thing I am and I'm charging more, nobody's going to come to me to buy it. So I may as well just shut down entirely. Charging less than everybody else is charging is, frankly, just silly. If I can get $7 and sell as much as I like at $7, there's very little point in me charging $6.50 or $6. So, that being the case, I don't think of me individually as having any control over the price. I just charge whatever the going rate happens to be for the product that I'm selling. We also would assume free entry and exit in the long run. That is, given enough time, there are no barriers keeping people out of this market, and at the same time, there are no barriers keeping people in this market. If it's profitable to join this market, people will tend to do that. If it's unprofitable to be in this market, people will tend to leave, and there's nothing stopping them in a price taker's market. We also know this market, depending on the textbook you read, this is also sometimes called perfect competition. Now, we want to be careful with this term perfect, where we mean it in the sense that it's as pure as competition can get, in that we take everything that makes competition happen and make it as extreme as we possibly can. Right? So, the market will be extremely competitive if you and I are selling exactly the same thing. Whereas if I'm selling something that's a little bit different than what you're selling, then we don't get quite as much competition for consumers. Consumers will develop a preference for one good over the other, and that will give us a certain amount of protection from the other good. Right, so identical products would be something that would make the market extremely competitive. The same goes for free entry and exit. If I have to worry about not just other firms that already exist, but firms that might possibly exist in the future, then that's naturally going to make the market more competitive as well. Now, under these assumptions, we can look at profit maximization. Now, here I have laid out a table. It's probably actually a good idea to try to copy this table down, maybe pause the video, get all of this written down. What this table shows is first the price for this good. Let's say it's $5. Then we look at various quantities. There I've listed 0, 100, 200, all the way up to 500. And then finally, what I have listed at this point is the cost of producing that quantity. So even if I produce nothing, I have a cost of $100. This might be for something like paying rent for my office space or something like that. If I produce 100, my cost goes up to $350. If I produce 200, it goes up to $550, and so on. Now what I've left blank is revenue, profit, marginal revenue, and marginal cost. We'll talk about marginal revenue and marginal cost in a little bit, but right now let's talk about revenue and profit. Okay. So revenue, we can calculate as being price times quantity. And it's just how much money is coming in to our business. So in this first line, filling that in, $5 a piece. If I'm selling none, my revenue is 0. To get my profit, I take the 0, subtract off my cost of 100. I have negative $100 in profit. Now take a little bit to go through and fill in the other lines, and then I'll see you in a couple seconds. Just pause the video, fill in the other lines, calculating revenue, calculating profit, just to get some practice doing that. If you've done that, here are the answers you should get. Right. Revenue should be increasing by 500 each time. This is not shocking. The quantity goes up by 100, the price is 5. So you're getting $500 more on each line compared to the previous line. The profit, we see, goes from negative 100 to 150 to 450, then it stays at 450, then it starts dropping. What's happening here is that, as we know, costs tend to accelerate. Eventually, costs are going to accelerate as we produce more. And that's exactly what is happening here. Costs are going up so fast that our revenue simply can't keep up as we produce more once we go from 300 to 400, then to 500. So it looks like if we're going to maximize profit, we want to produce somewhere between 200 and 300 units of our good, giving us a profit of something in the neighborhood of $450. Now, one point here is that price is a price per unit, but everything else is a total. So it's the total quantity that's being produced, total revenue coming in from selling that, total cost that we're spending, and the total profit that we're getting. So it's not profit per unit, this is total profit. We have $450 coming in overall. And another point here is to remember we're talking about economic profits. So it's $450 beyond what I would expect to earn in other lines of business. But really there are two methods we can use for profit maximization. What I used here is what I would call the brute force method. Here we calculate profit at every single quantity. We choose the quantity where it's highest. That's going to allow me to maximize profit. So in this case, 200 or 300 units is how much we want to produce. But then there's the more finesse version. Here we look in the logic of profit maximization. Right? And there, really, I'm key on to this idea that as we change the quantity, the profit's going to change. But the profit's changing because revenue and costs are changing. So it's really getting into these revenue and cost changes and comparing them, and using that then to determine whether we should increase or decrease the quantity we're producing. So let's talk about the profit maximizing output rule. So as we increase quantity, we know that revenue and costs will both increase. After all, if we're producing more stuff and we sell it at any given price, we're going to have more revenue come in. In the case that we had before, our product is selling for $5 a piece, we produce one more unit, we get $5 additional. At the same time, as we increase quantity, costs will increase, as we have new variable inputs that we have to use. How much costs increase, though, will depend on exactly where we are in our cost curve. After all, we know increasing production from 0 to a little bit above 0 is relatively cheap, while increasing production from a lot to a little bit more than a lot tends to be more expensive. So, the idea here is that if revenue increases faster than cost, our profit's going to increase. After all, since profit is the difference between revenue and cost, if revenue goes up really fast and cost goes up relatively slowly, we have a widening between revenue and cost. That widening indicates that there's an increase in profit. On the other hand, if revenue increases more slowly than costs, then our profit will decrease. That is, costs are going up really fast, revenue isn't going up as fast, revenue and costs get closer together, profits will be lower. On the other hand, as we decrease quantity, we know that revenue and cost will both decrease. So if revenue decreases faster than cost, then our profit will decrease. If revenue decreases more slowly than cost, then profit would increase. So the question is, how fast are our revenue and cost moving compared to each other? If revenue is moving really, really fast compared to our cost, right, that is, if revenue increases faster than cost as we increase quantity, then profit's going to increase as we produce more. On the other hand, if revenue is moving more slowly, perhaps decreasing more slowly than our cost, then we want to produce a little bit less to increase our profits. That's where we get the idea of marginal revenue and marginal cost. It would, after all, be nice to have some kind of calculation for how revenue and cost change as the quantity does. And that's, in fact, exactly what marginal revenue and marginal cost do for us. Marginal revenue is just the change in revenue divided by the change in quantity. Marginal cost is just the change in cost divided by the change in quantity. So if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, then revenue is changing faster than cost is. So it's a good idea for us to increase quantity. That'll give us higher profit. On the other hand, if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, the revenue is changing slower than cost. As a result, it's a good idea to decrease our quantity. So then the question comes, when do we know we're at the right quantity? After all, if we're at a quantity where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, we need to increase quantity somewhat. If we're at a quantity where marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, we need to decrease quantity somewhat. When do we stop changing our quantity? Well, that's what we call the output rule. As we know, if marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, we need to increase quantity. If it's less than marginal cost, we should decrease quantity. The output rule tells us then that the profit maximizing quantity is going to be at the point where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. At this point, our profit is as high as it can possibly be. Right. At any other point, we know there's some possibility to increase our profit by changing quantity. So it then follows that if marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, that must be the only condition under which it won't make sense for us to change the quantity.